a lot of people, Ricky, look at the teams of the early '80s and the late '80s as the best or one of the best teams that Luton have ever put together. But do you think to a certain aspect that them teams were underrated? Because I look at the likes of yourself and other players that were there at the time, Priest and Horton and Moss and whatnot. There's not that many international caps between you. Do you think on an international stage, on a bigger stage, you were underrated and basically, they just play for Luton Town sort of syndrome?
Absolutely. That not that I picked a side, and I'm not conceited enough to suggest that I deserve to be included more than anyone else. But the facts are the facts, and the truths are that you know Luton had a number of talented players. We always tried to play in the right manner, which supporters, whether they were Luton supporters or opposition supporters, they could always respect, they could always value, they'd always appreciate. I remember, as we say, going to Anfield and being 5-0 down after 28 minutes, but we didn't park the bus. We still tried to play. We ended up losing 6, and that was they weren't even kicking towards the cup at that time. The thing with us it wasn't a naivety, it was a love of the game, and David Pleat was adamant that he wanted the game to be played in a certain way, and the personnel we had played in that way. Now, from my own personal experience, I can only reach back into my memory and just recollect a time when Bobby Robson came to Kenilworth Road and we played Birmingham City in an evening game in the old First Division, which was the highest level at that time, and saw me play, and I played pretty well on the night, scored 2 goals, had a hand in the third goal, and then we were going to meet up the following Sunday for an international game against Wales when they had the home internationals. It was in October, and the papers after the game against Birmingham were adamant that I should play the following week. The quotes such as "Black Magic," "Heels a must for the Wales game," and so on and so forth. Now, bearing in mind that Bobby Robson was someone that always tried to prize me away from Luton, unbeknown to me at the time. When he saw David Pleat, he'd always go and say to him, "When are you going to sell me your boy Hill?" And adamant about it. And obviously he showed that by including me in his first selection when he took over as the England manager. So then he's come and seen me later on that season. I scored 2, made 1. It's a home international game. I've gone into the squad feeling great about myself, and I've got a chance of playing this Wednesday at Wembley. So we've had our normal session on Sunday. Don Howe has then called me after the session and said, "Ricky, after you showered, could you come down to the canteen and meet with myself and the gaffer?" So I said, "Okay, great." So feeling good again, thinking, well, he's going to give me a heads up, and I'm going to get in the side on Wednesday, and I'm preparing myself from now as to how that's going to go. So I've changed, and I've got to the canteen, and Don Howe's there, and Sir Bobby's there, and Sir Bobby says to me, "Ricky, I saw you play last week, and you're in great form, and you played tremendously well, and I guess you're on top of your game, and blah blah blah. I suppose you'll be expecting to play on Wednesday." And I'm thinking, okay. And then he turns around and said, "But we've got Gordon Cowans, who's just joined us from Aston Villa, and we need to have a look at everyone in the squad to see how they fit in, and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. But you are in my plans." And I thought at that stage, you know what? This is someone who likes me as a player, likes me as a person, picked me for his side, seen me playing on top level now, and I still can't get into the side now. It had to be the press in the Midlands versus me at Luton against Gordon at Aston Villa. And that's no disrespect to Gordon, because Gordon's a fine player and a good friend of mine. And I'm glad that he had the opportunity. But for me, that just summed up the fact that I couldn't have done any more, but yet still it wasn't enough.
Do you think to a certain aspect that Luton weren't really challenging for trophies, for cups and whatnot, that they kind of thought, oh well, the Aston Villa side of the '80s were quite formidable, and Ipswich back then were pretty good as well? Do you think that played into his thoughts in any way?
Of course. Subconsciously, again, it's easier to pick as a manager. You're picking someone from the so-called top echelons, who the sides that are playing in Europe at that time, Champions League. But that shouldn't have really deterred from the fact that I was good enough to and playing well for my side. If I wasn't playing well for Luton, then at that stage I wouldn't expect to be in the team or anywhere near the squad. But the mere fact that I was, I think from the assessment and evaluation side of things, they should look at the individual, not the actual team or the team surroundings or the fan base or the press who, you know, root for certain people because they're from that part of the country. And it just went against me because Luton was a family club, a hometown club, a smaller club than the other giants in the league at that time. But, you know, I would say hand on heart, we had more technically gifted players in our side than the majority of those top sides that I've just mentioned. If you think of Paul Walsh and Brian Steen, David Moss, myself, you know, David Priest latterly, Tim Breaker as a right back, Fozzie as our centre back. We had a very, very capable team, and that we should have been judged on our individual merits as players to see if we could have fitted into whatever England lineup was made or decided on. But I guess sometimes it went against us because we didn't have the backing of the media or the mass media.
You look at the England teams that were being selected at that time, though. You look at the midfield. And it was nearly all identical type players. It was all players who would run around a lot and who could pass it sideways, but there was never any creativity in there. And this is at a time when Robson had the likes of Tyson and his team and Muren, who were incredibly creative midfielders. And it was just a complete contrast.
Well, against you're spot on with your assessment. I mean, I'm not going to criticise or decry anyone's ability in the England side, but, you know, David Peat, I believe, pulled me one day and he said to me, Ricky, he says, you know, I totally believe the best combination for the England side right now, for him, it would be Hill, Hoddle and Robson as a three in midfield. And you know, because we like to play three at Luton, because we were the three, in his opinion, that were technically capable of playing at the next level, but had that mixture which we could kind of complement each other in a certain way. Now, I wouldn't deny that. I wouldn't suggest that wouldn't be a good three to play as a midfield three. And the frustrating thing was I could come back from England duty and David Peat will say to me, pull me again, and he'll say, you know what, Ricky, you done well, didn't you, whilst you were away? I said, yeah, I done okay, you know, myself and Brian. He said, no, you done well. I spoke to Bobby Robson. I said, okay. He said, I didn't realise Ricky Hill could do this. I didn't realise Ricky Hill was so good in the air. I didn't realise Ricky Hill could cross on the run. I didn't realise. So he was coming back and telling David Peat all the things I could do, but yet still it wasn't enough for me to force my way into his starting lineup. And I sometimes think back now, and I just couldn't understand that, because I felt on the night that I made my debut, it was suggested that I was the best debutant out of the five that played. Gary Mabbott, I think Steve Hodge played, David Armstrong played. But yet still I was never given an opportunity to play another full game. I came on off the bench on a couple of occasions.
No, I think the one that sticks out in my mind was Paris against the French.
Well, that was Brian and Paul. I was
Paul
injured,
Walsh,
unfortunately.
Yeah. They never saw the ball all game because there was no creativity in the midfield. It was
Absolutely.
crying out for someone who could get the ball down and do something with it.
And subsequently we lost 2-0, and for whatever reason they were made the scapegoats at that time because they never got another opportunity after that. And I couldn't understand it, because as strikers they need service to be judged, and neither of them got service on the night.
Well, let's face it, the two of them were on fire in the first division. If there was half a sniffer in the 18-yard box, it was going to end up in the back of the net. And that was because they got the ball fed into them. It was the people behind them knew what to do with it. And there was none of that out the England team.
And again, unfortunately, that is part of the whole cohesion, understanding, call it what you want, in terms of players. You know, my role, and I've always been an offensive-minded person in terms of my playing and my style of play, because, you know, I go back, I'm a student of the game in terms of the Bobby Charltons and the Franz Beckenbauers and Pele, of course, and George Best and Cruyff. That's my era, and Revellino and Gerson and all. So I grew up watching these guys. Eddie Gray, these were my team as I was growing up as a child. Eddie Gray,
Billy Bremner.
Billy Brem, Johnny Giles, the way Johnny Giles passed the ball. So I try to put all those components from all those players into my own game. And so part of my game was always I enjoyed making a goal more than scoring a goal. And my job was to try to give the forwards as much opportunities as they can, feed them the ball so they're comfortable, so they can move on to it, relax and do what they need to do to put the ball in the back of the net. So I guess that was my style, that was my thinking, that's my outlook, and I think Brian and Paul were the recipients of that, and I think Brian and I particularly spent a lot of years together, and it got to the point where there was a certain amount of telepathy going on, whereby, um, I would pick the ball up and I would know instantly that Brian would be moving this direction, and the ball would be left my foot to him, and so on and so forth. So it was good times, and obviously again they can look back and think they didn't get as many England caps as their talents warranted. Perhaps people have said that about myself as well. And again, it's not for me to
I
suggest
think
that.
you'll find most Luton fans would definitely say that.
Yes, definitely, definitely.